everyone, and welcome to this episode of White Collar Coffee Conversations. My name is Sean Renshaw. I'm a Senior Director at RSM US, and I lead the Digital Forensic and Incident Response practice here at RSM. We help our clients deal with both reactive situations when they've suffered some type of cyber event, as well as prepare to defend themselves against an event by having policies and procedures in place and conducting training to see how they would react during the time that they would be responding to an event. With me today is my colleague, Pat McNally. Pat, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself real quick.
Absolutely, Sean, and it's great to be here today. My name is Pat McNally. I'm a member of the incident response team at Octillo, which is a law firm focused entirely on data security and privacy. In the context of incident response, I've had the opportunity to work with Sean on a number of matters where Octillo and RSM have partnered together to lead the incident response to ransomwares, business email compromises, and all sorts of cybersecurity events that our mutual clients have experienced. So Sean, it's been great to work with you in the past, and it's great to be here today.
Same, Pat, and thanks for taking the time today, and also thanks everybody for listening and watching our conversation today. So Pat, you and I obviously have worked together over time, and we've been in this field for quite a while. Things have been different over the last few months. From a legal perspective, what are you seeing going on with our clients?
Absolutely, Sean. And it's a great question because it really has been an interesting few months. We've been used to, for the last, say, 18 months previously, I think many folks in the incident response industry felt used to a pattern emerging of where the major ransomware groups were really capturing all the headlines. There were so many different high-profile ransomware attacks by major groups such as ReEvil, Black Matter, Conti, that really focused a lot of media attention, even at a time when other groups were, of course, out there making attacks and disrupting businesses, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. What we've seen in the last couple of months has been a great deal of unpredictability, where there's been a strong response from the federal government and from law enforcement in particular, disrupting the activities of some of these legacy groups. And then from there, there's been a vacuum where a lot of affiliates or smaller groups have come onto the scene, often with new tactics, with disruptive behaviors, and with a pattern of activity that is often difficult to predict. Has that been your experience as well, Sean? What's the RSM team seeing these days?
Yeah, so we're seeing very similar things. We're seeing quite a slowdown the last few months due to some of the geopolitical issues going on, especially over in Eastern Europe. That's really, to your point, impacted a lot of the ransomware affiliates, Conti in particular, which was probably one of the largest ransomware attack groups, globally. They've kind of bifurcated. They've had a number of affiliates, attack them, by releasing critical information about the inner workings of the Conti group, which has led to, segmentation of those affiliates. And it's also given us in the industry, as well as law enforcement, a pretty good insight into how these attack groups, especially the Conti ransomware group, how they work and the inner workings, which has helped us from a investigative standpoint, but also it's given the government and similar, not just law enforcement, but I think, a number of other agencies or entities the ability to really target these groups. And, we're seeing their websites getting taken down. We're seeing, ransom payments being seized back by, government entities. So they definitely are under attack. And it's really made an impact. I think one of the things that we've seen, to your point, is it is very fractured. I mean, the ransomware attacks we're seeing right now are not the well-organized, basically professional crime groups that we had seen in the past. It's really, either startup groups or really one-off individuals doing it. So it is very unpredictable. We're used to there's a pattern. We knew what was going to happen, how they were going to act, and now we it's really kind of the Wild West out there.
No, that's well said. I think that one of the phrases that we've been throwing around our office lately has been we keep dealing with the junior varsity team while those bigger actors that have more experience and more technical and sophisticated infrastructure are focused elsewhere. And I think we've really seen that, Sean, to your point, that with the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've seen a lot of those legacy groups focus their activities elsewhere and not so much on American businesses in the private sector over here, at least at this point. But where that vacuum has really created an opportunity for smaller groups, for individual actors to come in, to take some of that, ransomware software, some of perhaps what they've learned working with the bigger groups, and then leverage that against American businesses to exactly that, unpredictable effects. We very recently we've seen a lot of ransom demands that we would normally expect to be significantly higher, in the low thousands of dollars, and in each case where that's occurred, it sends up some real warning flags that this may be the first time an individual has conducted a ransomware attack, which in many cases that could be a positive thing. We've seen some examples recently of failed encryption, of the inability to actually exfiltrate data, and some failed attempts to exfiltrate data. But it also can lead to other consequences, such as corrupted systems, such as ransomware just gone bad, and then ultimately the inability of some businesses who had not only their systems but their backups corrupted as well, and then not being in a position where negotiation with those ransomware actors is even possible. So on some respects, it's been really helpful to be dealing with a different segment of cyber criminals, but in others, particularly where there's not that predictability, it creates new challenges for our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a legal perspective, I know a lot of times your firm and my firm get brought in because we're dealing with clients that are in some type of highly regulated industry, whether it be healthcare, financial services, what have you. With the JV team, attacking these people, are you seeing any change from the regulators as to how they're dealing with this? Because as I said, I mean, this is completely different. These aren't the normal suspects that we're used to dealing with in their tactics and techniques. And to your point, the fact that sometimes their encryption is taking down the client's environment because it's it's bad ransomware software or whatever. I'm just curious what you're seeing, the regulators do in response to this.
It does complicate things from a regulatory front, particularly in the situation where a victim is in a position where the really only viable option for business continuity is to make a ransomware payment. Because when you're dealing with traditional actors, there's a number of steps you can do in terms of due diligence to analyze the Bitcoin wallets involved, to really get law enforcement involved at a very early stage, provide lots of information to law enforcement, which can help to determine whether or not a particular group or actor has any sort of nexus with a sanctioned entity or state. All of us in the industry are very familiar with the guidelines that came out first back in 2020 and then again in 2021 from the Office of Foreign Assets Control at the Department of Treasury, which indicated that victims of ransomware can be held liable to civil penalties if they make a ransomware payment that's ultimately to an entity that has a nexus with a sanctioned group or state. And so what that means in really plain English is a ransomware victim can be hit by ransomware, make a payment to an unknown actor, and then later on, if a regulator determines that there's a connection between that actor and a sanctioned entity, they can get in trouble again from the regulator. Well, it's one thing when you're dealing with a known group. We may not know who the individuals are, but at least we can identify through common tactics and forensic evidence that this particular group does not have a nexus with a sanctioned actor. But when you have these new actors coming onto the scene, that due diligence looks a lot different, because now we really have to try to find any evidence we can and then correlate that with different groups that are on sanctions list, both in the United States and the European Union, and really around the world. So it creates some new significant regulatory challenges. And I think that's true also even in instances where there's not a ransomware payment involved, because oftentimes, through our collaboration with law enforcement, as I know, RSM has great relationships with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, just like we do, work with them really on a day-to-day basis. Oftentimes we're able to go to law enforcement, provide forensic evidence, of course, with our client's permission and consent, and then ultimately receive some threat intelligence that can help to guide our forensic investigations and our legal analysis. And naturally, when these new variants and ransomware groups arrive on the scene, there's a lot less information, not only in the private sector, but also with law enforcement and regulators as well. So I think that uncertainty that we experience also exists both in terms of the due diligence necessary when a ransomware payment is involved, and just a developing knowledge gap that naturally occurs when a new actor emerges on the scene with law enforcement as well.
Yeah, and one point I really want to touch on here that you brought up is dealing with law enforcement. I was a federal agent the first third of my career, so I've been on the other side of the table. And I know historically, people, businesses, what have you, are very, very reluctant to talk to law enforcement. Um, and in this case, they're not under suspicion, they're not under investigation. It's just a natural reaction. This is one time that I have seen clients be much more willing to get law enforcement involved. And to your point, because while they may not be able to prosecute your specific case, you being the client's specific, cyber attack, they're aggregating all of this information, and then that's what we're seeing lead to, clawing back, some of the ransom, like they did with Colonial Pipeline, where they clawed back over $6 million of the ransom payment. We're seeing them go after these threat actor groups, take down their websites, disrupt them. Um, so, I've seen clients be much more willing to do this. And honestly, anybody I talk to, I have been advocating this, not, just from my prior life, but because this is really helpful for everybody. It's helpful for the victims. It's helpful for you and me because, as the FBI is taking this very, very seriously, as are the intelligence communities, the military, what have you. And people need to remember these are full-blown organized crime organizations. They, right now we're seeing kind of the, one-offs here and there, but the large ransomware attack groups, I mean, they are fully formed organizations. They even have helplines. They have 24/7 helplines. Um, it's really staggering, how well organized they are with this. But I just really wanted to stress that point because this is truly a situation where people need to, share this information, both with the government, but also trade organizations. I know for like financial services and, some of the other, really heavy targeted industries, they have their own information sharing mechanisms. So, these are times not to, be afraid to share information because honestly, yeah, we see, the Targets of the world and the Home Depots of the world on the front page of the paper, but there are literally thousands of companies that are being, targeted and falling victim to this every year. So it's no longer, a scarlet letter, as it were, for, companies to get hit with ransomware. Everybody's getting attacked by it. So.
No, I think that's exactly right, Sean. And certainly in our experience, I think that there was a couple years ago, there was a perception that if you involve law enforcement, they may come in, take over the investigation, disrupt your business continuity, maybe come in, swoop in, take your servers and, go and analyze them on their own. And honestly, that is just not our experience with our relationships with law enforcement now. And I think there's a real emphasis, particularly at the FBI, which is the federal agency that's really been designated to lead these investigations, because you're exactly right. We're dealing with sophisticated, complicated cyber criminal organizations, and the FBI really treats victims of cyber attacks as exactly that, as victims, and is really working through, I think, what exists a lot of great public-private partnerships to provide resources to those victims to help them recover, to really help to determine if there's anything out there that could help them in the immediate restoration of their business, including, for example, if there's any known decryptor to a particular ransomware, or if there's particular attack vectors or methods of data exfiltration. So we have really great relationships with the members of the Cyber Task Force at the FBI, and we've really come to encourage our clients to take advantage of these resources. Of course, thinking carefully about whatever we share through the lens of attorney-client privilege, but ultimately really working together, which I think has become necessary. That the only way we're actually going to get our hands around and prevent cyber attacks from happening are to increase partnerships between the business community and federal law enforcement. And I would add to that too the resources that are available to companies through, for example, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, that really provides great resources to every business on preventing cyber attacks from happening in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. Very, very much so. Well, Pat, I want to thank you for taking the time to join this discussion today. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and hopefully, the people watching and listening have enjoyed this discussion. I always enjoy these discussions because I always learn something new, and and enjoy sharing information with everybody. So, Pat, thank you again for joining us. Everybody else, our viewers and listeners, thank you for your interest in this. If you have a